I'm just going to get to a couple of logistical issues. My name is Danielle Droitsch, and you'll get to hear more about me in a moment. But essentially, we are going to be presenting to you, but we also want you guys to engage with us. So we're going to be encouraging the use of the chat. And my hope is that you'll have found the chat function and you can ask questions along the way. Suman will be monitoring that chat. So that's one piece. I love that people are introducing themselves in the chat and saying maybe where they are from. So Tiffany led the way. So if you could just introduce yourself. If you have an organization that you work with, you'd love to share us, that's fine. You don't have to. And then also where you're located. That would be just wonderful. So people can kind of get to know who's on the phone. And then we are recording this because we'll be sharing it with people who were not able, who registered and were unable to join. So we're just wanting to profile that to you. And then also, I'm going to be asking people to mute. I'm going to probably mute everybody at some point, just for the presentation part of things. But if you could mute yourself, that would be great, just to preserve the sound. So those are some of the logistical. Did I miss anything, Suman?
The other thing you all might want to do is to share, to save your chat at the end of today's presentation. And if you're not aware of how to do it, very quickly, down where you type in the chat section, you'll see 3 little dots on the right-hand corner. You click that and it'll prompt you to save your chat and it'll pop into your computer. So this way, if there are any questions or responses, all that information will be in the chat section saved.
Awesome. I mean, I love seeing all these introductions and all the different people from different places in the not just in the United States, but Canada. So that's awesome. So keep that introduction going. Use the chat for, like I said, for the questions. We'll be monitoring those and trying to make sure we answer them. I think we can dive in now. Suman, maybe you could also briefly mention the other sessions that are coming up.
Yep, absolutely. So thank you everyone for joining us. Again, I'm Suman Kapur, CEO of Well Balanced Solutions. We have 2 other sessions after this. Next Thursday is one on communication strategy in the remote workplace. And on the 25th, we're going to be talking about navigating difficult conversations in the workplace. Your one-time registration gives you access to all 3. So we hope we'll see you over the next 2 Thursdays.
Great. Yeah. So I'm going to introduce myself and then Suman will introduce herself, and then I'm going to be diving into we'll be diving into the content here. So my name is Danielle Droitsch. I know I see a lot of familiar names, and I also see some new names. I'm a coach, consultant, and a facilitator for mission-driven organizations. I run my business is Time for You, and I provide executive coaching to individuals, often leaders and team leaders. I also work with teams to help them move into a more high-performing space, especially a sector that doesn't have a lot of resources. They have to do a lot with a little. And one of my offerings, which you're going to hear about today, is around helping teams lean into their strengths and their behavioral styles, which we'll discuss, this idea of like how to really get to that high-performing space with stronger team dynamics. Suman, over to you.
Thanks. So again, I'm Suman Kapur, CEO of Well Balanced Solutions. My story is a little interesting. I'm a daughter of immigrant parents. I grew up here in the US, born and brought up here. So growing up, I really straddled 2 different cultures, which led me to my world of mediation and conflict management and resolution. Because for me, finding that common ground and building relationships and understanding about different people was my place of joy, and I loved it. So I am a professional development coach and consultant. I work with women leaders to help them recognize basic differences in communication and to strategically learn how to create solution-based communication language to resolve issues, and really to provide a safe space to understand communication problems. I have a master's degree in conflict analysis and resolution, and like I said, I was a mediator before starting my business. I'm in the DC area with my husband and my 2 children. And so Danielle.
I was going to do a little shout out for Suman because I worked with her and she is a golden star. I have to tell you, her conflict resolution issues, her experience has been phenomenal. So,
Thank you. Thanks, Danielle. Appreciate that. So I wanted to ask you, Danielle, why are we doing this? Why should we care about communication styles?
So this is the reason we're so excited about doing this is the first of our series is that I'm often coaching my clients around, these are some of the difficult issues that they bring to me. And it's not often around like, am I having enough meetings? And you know, should I have done this by email? It really comes down to this idea of like, what is happening in that communication space? Like what is actually that dynamic? And ultimately what I'm going to be talking about today is behavioral styles. So, so that is really why we're talking about this today, is that if you're thinking about really positive communications, effective communications, impactful communications, not outwardly, but between people in the workplace, it's really about looking at behavioral styles. So that's what it means to me, but what does it mean for you? I'm curious.
So for me, the first thing that comes to mind is like a lot of things in life, we can only control ourselves, right? So if there's a communication challenge, you really need to look at how the other person is receiving your message. So for me, it's really, are you communicating in a way that someone else is hearing you? Even if you think your style is right, if the other person isn't receiving your message, what's the point? So for me, that's the biggest thing. And then the second part that comes to mind for me is this idea about inclusive communication. How do we overcome communication barriers that create inclusive communication, right? So even though we're not going to dive very deep into that today, I want people to think about and understand the various barriers that are associated with communication. So things like generational barriers, language barriers, cultural and ethnic barriers, and then of course, nonverbal and emotional. So keep that in mind, and that might be a topic for another series down the road.
Absolutely. Yeah. When we started planning for this, we were like, oh my gosh, we could probably have a 10-part series here.
Seriously.
So today what we're going to do is I'm going to do a little PowerPoint presentation to talk about this idea of behavioral styles. And that's going to be a little bit sort of the theory behind this. And then we're going to actually dive into 2 case studies. And the case studies are going to really sort of say, okay, well, let's put this, you know, theory to practice. So we're going to be actually asking you guys to be listening along the way to the case studies, because there may be some advice and wisdom you guys could add to what we're doing. And then we're going to have a period for questions at the end. So we're going to be gathering up questions along the way. But if you have some questions, you know, at any point, go ahead and throw them in the chat, and we're going to have some places along the way where we can sort of collect the questions we've received and try to answer them then, so it's not waiting all the way till the end. Okay, so that's a bit of our plan. And so now I need to do the share screen. So give me a moment. And you're going to let me know, Suman, if you can see. Can you see it?
Yep, we're all good.
All right. Okay. So why focus on the space? Okay. Well, before we get into behavioral style, I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of communication in the workplace. Nothing you don't know, but the majority of those problems stem from poor communication practices. And then you have misunderstandings, ineffective collaboration, missed deadlines, lower productivity, poor company culture, lower engagement. And then we have this hybrid and remote workplace that we're all in. So the importance of this is really high. And yet here's what we're all experiencing. Aren't we communicating all the time anyway right now? Right now, the number of meetings we're all in has gone up by 13%. The number of emails that the time we dedicate to dealing with inbox and responding is about on average 11 hours a week. And that has gone up as well. And post-pandemic, we're working on average about 1 more hour per day. And so there's been a tremendous amount of communication going on. So the volume is going up. And yet, when we're thinking about this idea of building high-performing teams, we do want to ask ourselves 3 questions. And those questions are we communicating enough? And so the answer to that might be, we are communicating plenty, but you always want to ask that question because sometimes there's not enough happening. You want to ask yourself, are we communicating the right things? How many of us have gone to meetings and there's just nothing of substance going on in that meeting? So you always want to ask that question. And then you want to ask, are we choosing the right method of communication? Is there, is this really requires a meeting, or should we do this by email, or is this really a phone call versus an email? So those are questions that I generally will coach my clients on, but really those are not the heart of the things that are brought to me as a coach. There is a fourth question, and that question is, what can I learn about the behavioral style of the person or the team I'm interacting with? And this is really where the kinds of high performing communications come in, is really understanding behavioral style. What do I mean by behavioral styles? Well, we're going to talk more, but essentially the patterns and styles are what we bring when we're relating with others. That style we bring determines the ease in which we build relationships. We build our styles often early in our lives, in our childhood, and they're based on our personalities. We certainly bring our personalities, but they're also influenced by peers, education, parents, authority figures, the environment we're in. And our behavioral styles are showing up to work. So let's take an example. Maybe you can think for a moment in your mind of someone you work with where you just click. It is like you two are in sync. And you probably think of those people as having good chemistry at work. You think, okay, yeah, I've got good chemistry. But there is a lie we're telling ourselves about why that is good chemistry. And this is the lie that you might be telling yourself, that things are clicking with this person because I'm applying the golden rule. The golden rule is I am treating that person as I wish to be treated. So what does that mean? You're speaking to people as you wish to be spoken to. You're managing people the way you want to be managed. You are communicating with people the way you want to be communicated with. That is the golden rule. But in truth, the odds are that that approach will only work for a small portion. In fact, the odds are that most people in the world actually want to be treated in a different way than you wanted, in the way you would treat them. So in fact, there's something that we call the platinum rule. And that is, do unto others as they would have you do unto them, or more simply, treat others as they wish to be treated. So what does this mean? It means thinking more about the behavioral style of others. This is especially important when you're interacting with someone with a totally different style than yours. You might even think that you probably have people you're thinking about where you and they are on like different planets. And that different planets feeling, which we've all had, is really related back to behavioral styles. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the kinds of behaviors that drive those different styles. And then what we're going to be doing is you're going to start to see this applied in the case studies. So what are some of the factors that determine behavioral styles? First, degree of self-disclosure. So when we're thinking about that, it's sort of the amount, how open they are, how sharing they are. Are they sharing their feelings, or are they sort of more private? Are they more formal and proper, or are they sort of more relaxed and warm? Are they measured, sort of the way they talk, or are they more enthusiastic, gregarious? Are they highly verbal, talking a lot, or is it really more looking at those nonverbal cues? So that's sort of one factor. The next one is, how are they dealing with information and situations? So are they cautious around risk? Are they welcome risk? Are they dived into risk? Are they infrequently contributing to the conversation, or more frequently contributing? And how are they contributing? Do they make qualified statements like, well, I will do that if the information bears out, ... Or are they expressing their opinions strongly? They don't really need information. They're making emphatic statements like, this is absolutely true. And then a third factor is sort of what kind of control or forcefulness are they attempting to exercise over a situation? So are they someone who's going to be like more in that patient and cooperative space? They may be described as diplomatic. They're more likely to look for that consensus, or are they more likely to maintain their position when they're not in agreement? Do they tend to follow established rules and policies, or do they tend to want to break or bend the rules? So often, all too often, we are sort of focused on our behavioral style, and we fall into a trap. And I fall into the trap, and my clients do as well. And the trap is that our style is the right style. It's a good style. It's an effective style. But you know, there is really, at the end of the day, there's different styles. There's not necessarily a right or wrong style. There may be styles that are more effective, but at the end of the day, people do bring their styles to work. And so I'm actually working with teams on a pretty regular basis, helping them sort of understand their behavioral style so they can work more closely together. And they start with understanding their style and then understanding the style of others on their team. And so I administer an assessment, and you may want to take it yourself. It's called the DISC assessment. But in the absence of an assessment, there's still plenty you can do. And I'm going to give you some hints here in this call. So here are some questions that you may want to ask to really start thinking about their style and really try to get to the bottom of that person. And we're going to send these out, by the way, after the workshop, so you don't have to write them down if you don't want to. So the first thing is, how are they motivated? That's really, at the end of the day, a big core question. Are they motivated by a brainstorming session, or is it more about like having a really concrete plan? And that's just two examples. There's many different things that can motivate someone. In what environments do they flourish? Many people will flourish very well in a group setting and not flourish in that one-to-one, or vice versa. They're going to flourish in the one-to-one setting. Are they focused on tasks? You know, whereas there's going to be a real focus on exactly what needs to get done, or are they really more focused on the people, the relationships? And that's a big dynamic you see often. Do they solve problems by focusing on the right decision? So there's going to be sometimes people come up and they're really thinking about like, what is the right thing that should happen? They're not thinking about consensus. And then other people will come out and say, well, how can we all agree? And those dynamics also show up. Here are 3 more questions. So what information do they need? Some people will need a tremendous amount of information before taking action. Are they looking for sort of well-documented facts, or wanting to move things more along quickly? And information is really almost a small thing. It's almost like an exception to the rule. How rapidly do they want to make decisions? That's a big behavioral conflict that you will see in the workplace, is different pace. So some will be more methodical, let's go through a sequence, and others are going to be like, let's get to that outcome very quickly. And then you also want to say, how do they interact with people? There are some styles, and it's really not about the people at all. It's about the tasks. It's about the outcome. And for other people, though, it's all about the people. It's really understanding the people in the room, and they almost aren't, it's the tasks are sort of not that important. So as you can see, communications compatibility can be complex. I don't want you to walk away thinking, wow, this is really complicated, and I don't, you know, how can I navigate this? The case studies will hopefully help you break this down. But what you want to do is start with 3 simple questions. So to create that communications compatibility, the first one is to say, what is my preferred style? Knowing yourself is essential. You want to know yourself as a preferred style. How do you like to operate? How do you like to work? That probably won't feel very difficult to you. The second one is, what is the style of the person or people I'm working with? I would maybe focus on person here, because a team, trying to figure out a whole team is a little bit difficult, but sometimes you can feel a team's culture. So what is their style? Go through those questions, start to really understand where they're coming from. And then the third question, which is, what can I do to create some more compatibility between our styles? This is the tricky part. And that's why we have the case studies. But what you want to do is sort of say, are there some adaptations I could make so that I can sort of meet them where they're at? Which is a little bit of like, what are their needs? What are they motivated by? How do they want to be? How do they want to communicate with me? And then sort of this idea of building a bridge, because it's not about just changing ourselves and becoming them. It's about bridging between our style and their style. So this may make more sense with the case studies, but that's the 3 questions we want to approach. So I think now what we want to do is see if there's any questions about anything I've said so far before we dive into the case studies. And I'm going to stop the shares.
Yep, so there are no questions per se in the chat. Oh, Jen, do you have a question?
No, I was just playing with my hair.
No problem. It's all good. There are just definitely some comments in here. You know, those questions people are saying are great questions to be thinking about, and that in the overall scheme of things actually makes a lot of sense to be asking those questions.
Great. Okay, so I think the case studies can be what I'm thinking, and assuming this is sort of what I was going to do with my case study, but this idea of people sort of weighing in and helping us solve the case study, like weighing in with their own ideas, I think could be really useful. So we're going to walk you through the case study, but I welcome, certainly for the case study that I have, but Suman, you can weigh in here too. People sort of, you know, weighing in, how can you create the bridge? What are some ideas that you can do? So I just think there's probably some wisdom in this group we could tap into.
Sure. Yep, I'm absolutely fine with that. I can read a little bit about my case study and will try to remember to stop before I give away what ended up happening.
But yeah, no, I think it would be also, it's great to get yours and then get others. So yeah, dive in. Let's do the first case study.
Perfect. So, you know, we've all experienced that very excited, super outgoing person on our team, that super extroverted individual. And who knows, you might actually be that extrovert on the team. But has anyone ever taken the time to reflect on how the introverts and the extroverts communicate? I recently worked with this woman named Anjali, who is a senior project manager, and she was hired to lead a team on a fairly new and large project in the healthcare industry. So aside from having great success at a competing company, Anjali had great ideas and amazing energy, and her new CEO was more than thrilled to have her on board, as she could see Anjali taking her team on to new heights. Since she was a new hire, as most team leaders will do, she met with her team as a whole and then started to meet with them individually as a way of building that relationship, and also to learn about what's working and what's not working on her team. So as she moves through the process, her team members talked very highly of a woman named Tina. Everyone raved about Tina, and they talked about how great she was at what she did, how thoughtful, how much she generated these amazing ideas, and that on the team, Tina was the go-to person when her team was stuck on anything, whether it was figuring out the next steps or getting back on track. So obviously, Anjali could not wait to meet with Tina. And based on the conversations with the other team members, Anjali believed that Tina was going to be that untapped resource and was super excited to share her thoughts and ideas. But after the two of them met, Anjali could not believe what her team told her about Tina. She believed that her team was totally wrong, or that she was meeting a whole different person. So here are just some of the points that Anjali shared with me. She said, as I shared my ideas with Tina, she looked like a deer in headlights. She was so quiet. She lacked life. She seemed like she was super bored, as if I was an annoyance to her. There was no feedback except, sure, that sounds good. Maybe she had been here too long and is burnt out. Maybe she didn't like me. I don't know what was happening, but I could not understand what my team was thinking. And honestly, I just don't have time to hold this lady's hand. So this might be a good spot for us to stop and to think about what are some of the things Anjali could do. I have my set of things that I went back to her, but talking about piggybacking off of what Danielle said, any thoughts or ideas about what would be some advice and guidance for Anjali on managing or talking with Tina? Alexandra?
Well,
And then Jen.
Thank you. I was thinking about layering on hierarchy into all of these communication strategies. So I'm from New York. Perhaps this is a New York question, but I would wonder whether Tina had been considered for the position and then it had been given to an outsider.
I love it. As a fellow New Yorker, I get it. I grew up in Queens, so I get I know where you're coming from on that question. And that's really a good thing to think about as you're starting to observe people, is to really understand what brought them to here, you know, because that definitely is a dynamic. How many times have we interviewed for a position that was given to someone, especially outside of the organization? A great question to add there.
Thank you. And I'm from Queens too.
Oh, yay. Where? Really quickly.
Forest Hills Gardens.
Flushing.
Excellent.
I love it. Jen?
I think I was going to say a similar thing, is that even if Tina didn't apply for the job, she may have perceived herself as a leader in the group, and now a new thing is coming in, and what is being perceived as being a lack of interest is actually almost a defensiveness, like a protection of her position within the group. I know I think I've actually been that person, and I think I've experienced that kind of person. So.
Yep. So these are some great things in thinking about it, having these questions in mind as you start to observe that interaction. So Danielle, did you want to add anything?
No, I think it would be great to hear sort of what happened here.
Yeah. So one of the things that I started with is asking Anjali not to jump to any conclusions, right? She was already thinking about, she doesn't like me, has Tina been here too long? So she had already created some of those preconceived notions. So one of the things I asked her was not to jump to conclusions, but to take time to observe Tina and to take some notes. Observe Tina's interactions with her team and with herself. Watch for a couple of days and let's see what happens. Let's reconvene and let's see what's going on. So after a few days, Anjali and I got back on the phone, and the level of excitement was insane. She was thanking me and saying, thank you so much for suggesting that I stop and observe. Turns out Tina is an introvert. So when I asked Anjali for her to explain to me how she came to that conclusion, she said, well, I watched the team interact with Tina and I noticed they never go in her office as a group. They go one or two at a time, and either they go separately several hours apart or even a couple of days apart. I've noticed that Tina takes amazing copious notes at our staff meeting. And while she doesn't share a lot during our meetings, what she does share is so thought-provoking, and her thought process is super organized. And because she didn't share a lot, I used to think she didn't want to be here, but it seems like she was digesting and processing the meeting. And when she would hand out her written communications, they were very organized with bullet points and action items. And I could see how her process was leading up to an action item, which explained to me why her team believes she was that go-to person. So what ends up happening is a lot of times introverts come off as uninterested, tuned out, timid, and a lot of times team leads will feel they add no value to the organization. But in essence, your introverts really are one of the stronger teammates to have. They're analytical, they love research, they will give you an unbiased opinion because they've done so much research, they're practical, and skeptical. While they are skeptical, which can be a very negative word to use, it actually is a good thing because they will respectfully rip apart an idea, find loopholes, and give you suggestions. So with that said, I'm actually going to take a pause and ask here, now that we know Tina's communication style and how she is, any suggestions or ideas for what Anjali could do to adapt to Tina's styles, now that we've had a little bit of background and conversation here?
Feel free to use the chat, or you can raise your hand too. Both
Yep.
are welcome.
And that's fine. I'll go on. So I'm actually going to share with, oh, Danielle,
I
go
was
for
gonna
it.
Say, okay, thank you, Talia.
Yeah.
Thinking about sending her agendas before conversations, personalized meetings. These are great. Please keep
Yes.
coming because this is exactly right.
Yes.
Time to think and process information.
Yes. Oh my gosh, absolutely. So this is exactly the conversation that Anjali and I had and this plan that we did come up with. So we created an ideal list in which Anjali ranked important to least important. And by giving Tina the list, Tina was able to work her magic quietly and on her own. Someone talked about setting up personalized meetings. Absolutely. So the two of them agreed that they were going to meet at least once a week, plus the team meeting in which Tina would give an update. But knowing that Tina was going to give a team meeting update helped her prepare for her introverted personality and the way she communicates. So she had that time to prepare. Someone talked about giving Tina the time to process. Exactly. So we set up a time frame in which Tina would have enough time to process the conversation. A lot of times introverts get thrown off a little bit by people who speak very quickly because they don't have that time to process what's going on. So Anjali started working on her extroverted personality, where she was all over the place, where she was jumping and interrupting. And while some perceive it as rude, as an extrovert, they're so excited and passionate. So Anjali's working on giving the pauses in the conversation, slowing down, and actually following the agenda, right? So these are things that Anjali is doing to adapt to Tina's style. Because again, you can only change and you can only change you and your process. So in essence, that is what the plan is. And you all hit every single thing. It's excellent.
Yeah, so and one thing I want to say about the introvert extrovert, because that's a binary, right? And that's true. You'll see those. You may actually find different types of introverts and different types of extroverts. So you may want to go back and sort of really understand, like, in what way. There's if you think about that DISC profile that I was telling you about, you're basically getting a little bit of overview. You're going to find people who are going to be quieter, who are going to be more people focused, and you're going to find people who are quieter, who are task focused. So that's part of what you're trying to do, is really pull out. And in this case, it could be that the person you're working with is quiet, but they're still thinking about people, but they're quiet thinking about its tasks. So you just want to pull out those questions and become a little bit of a discovery. We're going to get to the next case study, which is a bit different. And what I'd like for you guys to do is listen in. I'm going to give you as much information, and then I'd like to see if I can tap into the wisdom of this group based on what you know and what you've heard today to get your best idea. So here's my case study. Jackie worked at a large nonprofit and reported to John. Jackie's role was as a research analyst, and while her job was to do research and create reports, she was also getting more work to lead new initiatives that required managing projects and having teams. Before this new work, she didn't have to engage a lot with John. Jackie is a warm, well-liked person on the team. She's a strong project manager and can move things along, meanwhile keeping everyone informed and engaged. She is positive and always thinking about how people are feeling. But now with these new initiatives, she's seemingly in John's office all of the time. He cares deeply about these new initiatives, and particularly one project where he wants to be constantly involved. In fact, John has called Jackie into his office numerous times, asking questions about the project, seemingly wanting to change the project midstream. He's putting a lot of pressure on Jackie to keep things moving. Sometimes he's pushing her to think big about the project in a way that's not comfortable to her. Jackie is relatively new to this role and isn't comfortable taking risks. In addition, Jackie, as a project manager, is not just responsible to John, but to this larger team of people who are providing input to the project. Part of her role is to listen to the team, incorporate that input, and then move the project ahead. And there's also some procedures to adhere to. So when Jackie goes to John's office for these meetings, it's very stressful to her. First of all, John doesn't ask her anything about her life. He just dives straight into the task and doesn't even look up from his computer. John has been a big boss at the organization for 20 years and is viewed as one of the most effective leaders. He has received numerous awards for all of his groundbreaking work, but he is known as being hard to work for. The dynamic has been uneasy, John pushing her forward and Jackie pushing back. So this dynamic hasn't worked. Jackie feels like she's tried everything. She's tried to connect with him on a personal level. She's tried to tell John about the fact the team has a process in place and there's procedures she has to follow. She showed up with her reports on the project, but he basically says that she can ignore all of that. And Jackie wants to find a way forward with her boss. So what does she do here? So the first question I'm going to ask you is, what is Jackie's observed style? What do you observe about Jackie? That's sort of the first question of the group. And feel free to, you can raise your hand. I'm not sure I'm seeing everybody here. So if you have your hand raised, I can't. Yeah, she's intuitive. What else do you observe about her? Organized, attention to details. She's focused on the tasks. Problem solver. What do you think she's motivated by? Yeah, there's a relationship piece. So there's a motivation. So she may be feeling motivated by keeping the team harmonious. So that's one style, is worried about the whole group of people, knowing everyone's feeling heard and their input is there. There seems to be rules and procedures. She's like task focused. There's also, she's being deliberate with decision making. So she may be slower, at least in relation to John. And I gave you a clue. Oh, Angela.
I'm sorry. I just can't type very well on my phone.
That's fine. Go for it.
I think I'm a little bit in Jackie's position myself, but it feels like she's just trying too hard to please him and she's going to burn out or be very unhappy. So I'm not really sure what she can do, because also he seems to be getting a lot of recognition. So it's not like he's a bad, worker or whatever. So anyway, that's my observation. I don't know really what she could do with this type of person.
Yeah, well, we are going to get to that, Angela, but thank you for that. I mean, this is I see this dynamic a lot with my clients. So that's why I chose this case study. But we're just trying to get into like what is her observed style? So basically motivated by keeping the team harmonious, knowing that everyone feels heard and input. She's definitely gonna be people focused here. She does care about tasks, but I think based on the way I'm thinking about it, she's gonna be more focused on, is the team harmonious? Is everybody feeling heard? She's interested in following rules and procedures. She's preferring to be more deliberate and slow, and her normal style is to be open with that conversation, to get to know someone deeply. So what about John? I'm guessing we have some, so with John, what I want you to do is see if you can move into that space of observed behavior. And this is one of the key things, and Suman really hit the nail on the head. You almost have to go in dispassionately and without judgment. Tell me what you observe about John's behavior.
Yep, so someone already posted it, wrote in here, John sounds like a micromanager and he's holding her back. And there's a couple of agreements to that statement.
Yes, what else that's great. What else do we observe about his style?
John is also, he's like big picture, strategic versus like not in the weeds and not, he doesn't want the personal, he doesn't want all the details. He just wants like, how are we getting there? So he's definitely a driver.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so also in here, we've got, these are lighting up here, moving quick. Risk taker, goal focused. He may be like a robot. He's outcome oriented, doesn't care about process as long as the outcome is okay. People are agreeing with Tiffany. Cares about getting the results he wants and cares less about the process.
Yep. Yep, that's absolutely. So number one, he's motivated by big ideas. He's going to be that guy. He's going to be wanting to move project into innovation. His style is very direct. He's oriented toward tasks. He does appear to be exerting control on the project, and we often will define that as micromanagement. I know I've used the word micromanager with people in my life that way too, but this idea of control, exerting control and wanting to feel control, and there's a style behind that. He doesn't appear to be focused on people or relationships. It's very about that outcome, and he wants speed. Okay, so we have two different styles here, and just trying to pull back here and say, okay, Jackie, she's not looking to leave her job. She's not looking to call John out. It's not in that space yet of it being really a high conflict, which again, we're going to talk about in another session, because that when it gets to that place, you know, sometimes it's not about resolving behavioral styles, but here, Jackie's just looking for some strategies. So I am going to turn this back to you guys. I have some of my own ideas. Of course, I created this case study, so I had some time to think about it. What can Jackie do to create more compatibility with, so she is the one who's thinking about what she can do to create more compatibility with John. What ideas do you have? Yep, tell him less. So Talia, if you could just like elaborate on that, because I think that's really important, but it might be useful to just sort of articulate. I think I know what you're getting at. Oh yeah, go ahead, just get on.
Hi. So I've worked with people like this before who, when you go into their office and tell them about the process that you've gone through, they think that you are either telling them you're not done or explaining to them why you didn't get to the answer, or some other way, in some other way, just like you're boring them because they don't care about that. And then if you go in and say, here's where we are and here's what the answer is, they actually engage better with just hearing a result, because they're result oriented and they want to know where you ended up. Yeah. A different point, I've worked for someone like this, and a strategy I used, which maybe not be always recommended, but I used the phrase, I totally agree with you, all the time, even if what I was about to say was the complete opposite of what he had just said. But if I had said, oh yeah, I totally agree with that, and here's how I would do it, he was totally on board. If I said, oh, not quite, here's what I would do instead, he would never agree. So that's another one that people like that sometimes.
Yep. Yeah, you're thinking about them, and it's hard because we remember we bring our style and we kind of think this is the right style, but sometimes, and this in the DISC profile, it's a D. That's a D. I just described a D, and Ds are often some of the hardest. Not always. I mean, Ds are going to be great people too, but it just that they come across very strongly and often will dominate. That's D stands for dominate, dominance, the team, and often their biggest sort of fear is not being in control. So all of the styles have different fears, and not being in control is one of them. Yeah, Ds are a tough one, exactly. So let me just share with you a couple of my thoughts. So I came up with 3 different strategies, and these are not, you know, necessarily the best ones, but the ones that I would, if I was in a coaching session. So it appears that John he's motivated by big ideas. And so if there was a way Jackie could organize her conversations to allow for space in that big ideas area, like a brainstorm, or just allowing him to just get to that space. He's not going to care about the rules and the procedures and the process. He may not even care what the other team members think. He's going to want that space. So giving, and I have a specific client that I'm thinking about, and her strategy was to get into the brainstorming space. And her fear before doing that was, well, what if we do that and then suddenly the project changed? And in fact, if you have a big ideas person, sometimes they just want to have the ideas. It's not always about actually pursuing the ideas. That's the fear that somebody who's more procedurally oriented, it's like opening that door doesn't mean you're going to do it. So number 2, well, that was number 1. Number 2 is she knows John cares about tasks and the speed of the process. And so acknowledging that she hears him on that speed, she still has to, she doesn't want to necessarily speed it up just for him, but acknowledging his need for speed and then telling him, here are all the things she's doing to keep the process moving forward and as fast as possible. So she's kind of flipping it. She's not saying, here's what we need to do in order to like tick all the boxes. She's saying, I'm moving this as fast as I can. You know, here are the things I'm doing to streamline and make it faster. So she's coming at it from his perspective. And then the third is she wants to know John wants to have some control. So D's want to feel they have control. And if they don't feel they have control, then that's when they start to really get stressed out because they don't feel that's what they want. That's their biggest fear. They're not in control. So there are things we can do with D's to actually have them feel like they're in control, even if they're not in control, because she is the project manager here. And so what she might do is to look for those specific areas where she can create space where he is sort of directing. So she says, here are some questions where I do want your direction, John. And then he feels, okay, I'm in control again. He may not be in control of the whole project, but creating space for the D to feel they have some control, not necessarily total control, can be a good strategy. Any other ideas that come up from you as we sort of move into the final? Oh, because Angela, your hand is raised. I'm not sure if it's the second time or the first time.
No, I'm sorry, it wasn't.
Okay. So any other ideas for working with Ds? I would say the number one group of people who are coaching situations is usually Ds in terms of challenges. Not always though, but any other, Tiffany says, I have a coworker who's a D and I learned to work within the control she needed for the win-win. And ultimately she came around. But yeah, it sounds like Tiffany, you did some adaptation. Jen. Oh, you're on mute.
Somebody has to do that on every meeting. It's interesting because part of it is playing to their characteristics. But ultimately, if it's a long-term working relationship, you'd also like to shift them out of that and help them feel secure without always having to feel like they're in control. So I would say like that would be a strategy I would want to put in place to get through the now. But ultimately, I'd like to bring John into the team more and understand things. I don't know if that's possible, but I feel like that would also be a goal that I would want to have in the long term.
Well, and to the extent, so this has sort of been my experience as a coach has been, there are times when two people can get together and they can actually talk about their styles, like the very, very, so the DISC as an example, like I had a woman, sort of a senior executive I coached, and she was having sort of routine problems with someone else. Now she wasn't necessarily going to them and saying, please take the DISC. So the two of us can sit down with our DISC assessment, but it's sort of through an education process. She was able to educate this other woman about her style. She was able to walk in there dispassionately and say, here's my style, and be able to sort of say, but I'm seeing this is sort of what you want. And, you know, is there a way that we can come together? Now, that's not always easy. Like if it's in a boss situation, or if it's someone who's not self-reflective and they're like, well, I don't care what your style is, right, Jen? But yes, I mean, this is the thing, like you can start with sort of this very basic 3 questions. What's my style? What's their style? And what are some things I can do? But if there's a long-term relationship at play, then what you would want to do is see if there's a way to actually have a conversation about the different styles. Mm-hmm. And there's another situation I'm thinking about where the D in the group, the D was sort of one of the key leaders, and it was came out in the team results. She started to realize that her D was very, very strong, and that wasn't giving space to the others. So she was self-reflective, and now she's making adaptations because of the feedback she's receiving. But we all know that there are personalities that are going to be less receptive. And then you have to sort of say, well, what can I do to adapt in that moment? But I know that you understand this. So. The DISC styles, there's 4 DISC styles, and you can be, you're not one. You can be, have like, so DISC is dominance, I is influencing. Usually those are politicians, people in communications, or just sort of those outward, very people oriented. S is, I always forget what S is. I don't know why, but S is like the collaborative, cooperative, harmonious people. They bring everybody.
Steadiness.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's sort of this idea of like everybody coming together and, thinking about stability, and then C's are, why am I like Megan, you may be right here to help me.
Conscientiousness. I have it up. I was just wondering for these case studies, who we know John was a D, what were the other individuals so we could kind of place how people are acting?
So she would have been in, like, I was actually thinking about that. She would have been an S and a C. So she would be, some of her would be steady, trying to build consensus, but she does have a little bit of C in her, which is about process and procedures. So you might have a dominant one, like a sort of a capital S, and then you would have like a lowercase. And what you want to do is sort of be reflective. So you could take the disc and just reflect on your own results and get those. And then in the report that you would receive, you actually get to learn about all of this. They basically give you all the results of all the other types. And so what I've been coaching my clients on is, they're not going to walk around and say, hey, could you take this assessment, please, so I can figure out how to work with you? Like, that's not really how it's going to work. So they just start to understand other behavioral styles. They see them. And then they start to say, okay, I think that person's a C. I'm really going to start to connect with them on that basis. So I think there was an early question that somebody asked, and there may be others, and Suman, you may have to help me here a little bit, but now we have just a few more minutes for questions, and I'm already in that space.
Yeah, so we did have a question earlier. It said, how to deal or anticipate behavior styles in interviews. I have encountered styles that have been engaged and playful, and some rigid and awkward. But since this is out of my control, it is definitely hard to manage on the spot.
And as a person who asked that, I don't know if you're still here, but are you the person interviewing?
I'm the interviewee. So going into the interview.
Oh, you're being interviewed.
Yes, yes.
And so are so there was two types. There was one that's playful, and then there was this one rigid. So what's showing up in the interview?
Most of the time they feel more rigid. Like, I'm more of an engageful and playful person when I speak about myself. That's how I feel more comfortable. But then there's already a stereotype in interviews. It's supposed to be very professional. And sometimes those people come across as very rigid. Like, I had an interview once where it felt that they wanted to talk more than me. And it felt weird because it felt like they were telling me about the position where I should have been telling them about myself. Mm-hmm. So it was just like a communication style that didn't agree with me. So I was just curious of how to do.
Yeah, and so that's, we'll have our coworkers who we get to work with on a regular basis, but then there's these moments when, important moments like an interview, where suddenly you're like, your brain's like trying to figure out what to do. And my best advice would be, if their brain could try to do become the observer. This is what Suman was saying. We're trying to just not instinctively react to styles, because that's what we tend to do. And when we go into that sort of fight or flight, we are not going to be our best selves, because we're reacting to that. Do they hate me? Do they not like me? What's going wrong? That's kind of, so we want to do is to put that observer hat on and say, let's be curious. Like, maybe what is their style, and without judgment. And then, it's hard in the moment, Camilla, to actually create that adaptation plan right in the moment. But you may decide to just still be yourself and not worry about their style. Or you may say, you know what, I see their style. I may make a couple of shifts for them. But what I've seen in the coaching that I've done around this is that just putting on the observer hat can be an awesome strategy, because then you're sort of dispassionately moving away from starting to question yourself and feel a lack of confidence. And instead your wise inner self will come up with a better plan. Jen, thank you so much, Camille, for that question.
Yeah, and if I can sort of jump in here a little bit on that one too. So a lot of times when you find the person who's interviewing tends to talk a lot, it really depends what they're talking about. If they're talking about the position, if they're giving you that information, that they're almost information overloading, so that you get enough to make an informed decision as to whether this position is right for you. So I think a lot of it depends on what message and what they're talking about. and you receive it that way. It really is how you change your mindset in order to receive that information. Again, you can only control you. So if you are being bombarded with information, what is it? Is it useful information? How do I weed out what's useful? You know, using the reframing. So here's what I heard about it. Here's where my strengths might come in for that. So it's sort of taking the information. Now, if they're talking about themselves and I love this and I, again, you can ask the questions, turn it around so that it comes back to, you like this organization a lot. I hear that. How does this help? Or think about questions that bring it back to helping you make the decision whether this is a right fit for you. Yep, so Tiffany actually put in here, which is also a really great model, is this thing called the 6 thinking hats. She's dropped the link in there, and it is actually a really, I had not heard of it. I did a quick look when she dropped it in, but looks like it's a tool to boost productivity of creative thinking. It says by dividing the different styles of thinking into 6 hats. You have logic, emotion, caution, optimism, creativity, and control. So if you save the chat or copy and paste that link, you can have a look at a little deeper into what that means.
And with just a few more minutes, Jen, what is your question? Then we'll wrap.
The point I just wanted to add is thank you for the reminder to be curious. I feel with working so much, well, I mean, I've been working from home for years, but I had so much more interaction with people. I use curiosity more in face-to-face. The isolation and us all being online. And I feel that, as you know, I work in the environmental movement and the groups have gone deeply into their organizations. And I'm seeing more conflict and tension. And it's because we've forgotten to be curious about what other people are coming from. And I think that I mean, it happens outside of a pandemic, but I really think this pandemic for me and my experience has exacerbated and we've forgotten to be curious. So that to me was a really helpful reminder. And I feel like I can show up a lot better in my many, many meetings with very strong personalities. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, and when we're stressed out, those personality types, we all revert to the things we're fearful. So the D and the John, if he feels out of control, he is going to actually lean in more and become more difficult. If he feels like he's in control, then he's going to actually relax. And that's sort of what we try to do. But that's not true for all of them. The steady state person looking for, things to be steady. They don't want change. And so they'll become more rigid when that doesn't happen. So we have to understand what they're motivated by in order to see if we can create that space that's not based on stress.
Yeah,
so.
Great.
Thanks. So anyway, we're going to wrap. It's 1 minute. We want to remind you about the other 2 sessions. So Suman, how about you wrap us up for the session?
Yeah, well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us. We do hope that this was helpful and gave you some food for thought here. Again, the next 2 Thursdays, please join us on the 18th. We're going to be talking about how to lean into successful communication strategies for the remote workplace. And on the 25th, we're going to be talking about navigating difficult conversations in the workplace. So please join us. And again, the link that you all used for today will work for the next 2 Thursdays. We'll work on getting a recording out, a copy of the recording out to everyone. And we'll include the questions that Danielle had posted earlier today. And so we look forward to seeing you all on Thursday. Thank you again so much for spending your time with us.
Thank you so much for joining, everyone. Have a great one.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.